This episode of Watch the Media features one of the outstanding young radio performers here in the state of Nebraska. Josh Peterson is a co-host with John Bishop of Unsportsmanlike Conduct, 2 to 6 p.m. weekdays on 1620 The Zone in Omaha. Very popular, highly rated radio show here in the state of Nebraska. And he's branched out into a number of other ventures in the podcast and presentation world. And we're going to talk about that and talk about Huskers football, of course, this time around on Watch the Media. I would guess I am violating some copyright law if I say that Josh Peterson is a friend of the program, but he certainly is a friend of the program, and we're happy to have him with us again. Josh, how are you today?
John, I'm tremendous. We are getting closer and closer to football season, so you know that this is the time every year where I get ready to cook for the fall. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the podcast again.
And you'll be cooking every day, 3 meals a day for 7 days a week. And it's, not just football season, Josh. You're cooking and coverage of the Huskers every day of the year. I don't know how you do it, but you do it.
Yep, we do. I have always thought, John, that, first of all, I have a great job. I'm very lucky to have a job where, as I always describe to people, if I worked a normal 9 to 5, how I would kill time at the office is how I prepare for my job. And that's by reading a lot of articles, trying to stay in touch with everything. But I go back to what I said at the start. I feel very lucky because I love getting to talk about Nebraska football every day. And I know that a lot of our audience wants to hear about Nebraska football every day. So I think I'm one of the rare ones in the business that I don't really get tired of it. So that has been very important for my career path over the last decade plus.
One of the things that I like about your program, and there's a lot of things I like about your program, but one of the things I like especially is that while I can tune into other radio stations and they literally are talking about nothing but Husker football, you guys do what radio is supposed to be in the 21st century: pop culture, television, some goofy stuff. Some goofier than others, right? But really, to capture a mass audience, and we've talked about this before, to capture a mass audience really is that you have to add those things in there. And do you guys ever feel like, there's a question coming, do you ever feel like there's a perfect formula for that stuff?
Great question. I don't know for sure if I would say that if there's like a perfect formula or not. I think part of it is, maybe it's just kind of a it when you see it or it when you hear it conversation, right? Like John and I've been very lucky to work with John now for 13 years as a partnership, because I was his producer before I became his co-host. And we've been on the air now since August of 2014 on a day-to-day, full-time, I signed the contract basis, right? So this will be our 12th football season. And so, that's a long relationship in life. That's a long relationship in radio. Yeah. This does not really happen very often. And so I feel very blessed in that regard. And so, him and I, that kind of give and take on goofy versus serious, I think that we have just kind of developed that over the years, which is, I think, important. When I listen to a radio show, I want there to be that. I want the sports, but I also want the fun. The way I always describe it to people, John, is if you go to a sports bar with your buds, you don't talk about sports for 3 hours. You talk about life. You talk about marriage. You talk about your kids. You talk about your pets. You talk about a weird thing that happened at work. We do that, and we talk about all those things, including the weird things that happen at our work. The crazy thing is our bosses are listening when we do those. But I think that having that balance is important. I think that we have struck that chord pretty well, though, I would say, over the last decade or so.
One of the things that is almost impossible, and anybody who's tried to run a radio station knows this, and that is to find that chemistry. And it isn't always easy. Look around radio stations. Co-hosts come and go, mix and match. There's sometimes a long-standing friend of the community, and then they mix people in and out. Yeah. Maybe you've already answered it, but what is the chemistry that is at work here?
I think John and I have really good chemistry. I've thought that since day one, really, and that's been nice because I've gone into work a few times over the years, maybe with a fill-in or something, where I'm like, all right, this is going to be kind of a slog. Like, let's see if we can get through this. I have always appreciated and not taken for granted what I have. I had a great boss for a few years named Dave Tepper. I believe you've had him on your show before. Dave is out in Denver now. He runs KOA, which is the home of the Denver Broncos. And Dave told me early on, like, if you like this, like, appreciate it. Don't just be chasing that dragon of a new host or a solo show just because you feel like you have to do that. If you like it, enjoy it and take that to heart. And I always have, because he told me some horror stories about some of the stations that he had been at in the past, down in Houston in particular, where there were some big personalities and eventually they got annoyed with each other and they tried to split off. And guess what? Weren't as good apart as they were together. And so I've never really had that pull, right? I've never gone into the boss's office. I need a new co-host. So that's also helped too. But I've always tried to take that to heart because it's, sometimes I go to work and I'm like, I'm annoyed with him today. And I know he has days where he's annoyed with me. But for the most part, 52 weeks a year, I'm happy on pretty much all of them.
No matter how much you like the person you work with, the words, "I agree with you, John," or "I agree with you, Josh, perfectly." Well, that's exactly what I was thinking, Josh. Well, that's what I was thinking, John. Those are not part of the formula to be successful. No matter how much you like each other, you can't have the same personality. You can't sound the same. You can't have the same background. Honestly, those programs just don't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't. And so when we do agree, because, we never go into a show planning like, okay, you take this opinion, I take this opinion. And given that we've worked together for over a decade, he knows where I'm going to land on almost every issue. And I would say the same thing about him, right? Rarely am I surprised by an opinion John has anymore. And so when I know we're going to agree, it's maybe one of the hosts is pitched a little bit higher. Maybe they're a little stronger in their viewpoint. And otherwise it's like, okay, how can we not argue, but how can we have a conversation about something that we agree on and make it interesting? And again, it's just something I'm kind of always thinking about because I'm always, thinking about what I want to say on the radio or on a podcast or anything like that.
All of the programs on 1620 The Zone are 4 hours, the live programs, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the midday, and you do 4 hours in the afternoon, 2 to 6, 5 days a week. That's a lot of radio, and that's a lot of time to be with energy and with interest and with comedy or whatever it is. How do you guys try to pace the program, if you do, and maybe it's just natural, to make it lively from before 2:00 when you do your conversation with Happer until 6:00 at night every day?
I don't know if we've ever really had that conversation, right? About like, how do we want to pitch the energy level of the show? I mean, we certainly have benchmarks on, hey, this time we want to have this. Like we try to put really, really important guests, especially like national guests. We try to have them because we sweep the top of the hour. And so we try to have them in that, as we call it, the 250 to 350 spot, the happy hour spot, if you will, which is when Michael Severe now joins us on Mondays, because we're able to sweep the hour. So the conversation's a little bit longer. And so we kind of know, all right, if we get to that part of the show, like that's when a guest that we are hopefully interested in. And more importantly, the audience we hope is interested in as well. I have found though, in my, decade plus on the air, I whatever reason, however I'm able to do it, 2:00 or 1:45, 1:50-ish with the crossover with Happer rolls around. And that is my energy peak of the entire day. We're recording this in mid-July. The previous day's show, I got a horrible night of sleep, couldn't sleep, woke up, couldn't go back to bed. And I just remember like feeling like I was dragging all day. 1:45 hit, boom, ready to go. And then I got in my car and I drove home. And I told my wife later that night, I was like, the whole day hit me. And so my body, I think the ebbs and flows of a day, it really knows, all right, hey, it's 1:45. It's go time now. And I'm very thankful for that because nothing worse than being tired and being on the radio and it showing. Like, you got to have that energy because you want people in the car to know, like, you're there and that you can trust that we'll be here for you for 4 hours.
And not many worse things than going to a job you don't like and dragging yourself there. And again, not to sound like you're a firefighter or a doctor saving lives, but but being good for 4 hours is both art and craft, isn't it? I mean, it is not, you're not saving lives, or maybe you are, I don't know, in some respects, but it is both a craft that you learn, and then it becomes an art. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, the way that I've described myself over the years, I am myself on the radio, just pitched a little higher. I'm myself turned up to 11, to go back to a This is Spinal Tap reference. It is who I am. I am goofy. I have weird food takes. I am very opinionated on a lot of stuff, and I want to talk about football. Like, that is me on the radio. I just talk a little bit louder, and I enunciate my words hopefully a little bit better. But otherwise, it is the same person that I am, and that's important, right? Again, to go back to something Dave Tepper once told me, he told this story about one of his employees and how they were out and about, and he was there, and they asked him, like, man, do you really believe that opinion that you gave? And he was like, no. And it was like, wow, that, like, you would talk about a way to lose trust with your audience. And so what I say on the radio, I'm never just doing it just to do it. And if I want to argue an opposing viewpoint that I don't believe, I try to make sure it's like, hey, let me try. Let me play devil's advocate for this just for a moment to see what we think of the other side of the argument. But that's important. You do not want to lose the trust of the audience. I certainly don't. And you definitely don't want to do it by spewing opinions that they think is fake. I mean, that's the trouble that Skip Bayless has gotten into over the years, right? Like, people are like, is this real? Has he worked himself into a shoot? Like, what is happening with this right now? I don't ever want to be that way. So if you disagree with me, that's awesome. That's fine. Just know that, like, I'm not coming at it just to, for S's and G's, so to speak.
I think in this, this is sort of a bigger picture, existential kind of conversation, but I think in the bigger picture of this era of attention that we're in, the Stephen A. Smith, Pat McAfee, now Dave Portnoy is going to Fox to do stuff on Fox, and this era of attention, the sports attention industry, there's a couple of things that we have to be wary of, and one of them is, and again, it sounds sort of academic, and it's not intended to, Josh, but we have to understand the value of truth, and we have to understand that authenticity is, as you've suggested, one of the benchmarks of what we do, because the audience knows when you're not.
Yeah, 100%, stick to sports, so to speak. But there's been a lot of conversation since the election, right, about, how can the Democratic Party be more authentic? I know that that's been a huge conversation, amongst those folks, given that they lost the presidential election and some other stuff too. And I feel like if you have to talk about how authentic you are or aren't being, then you've already lost the plot. Like, I don't go into the office and like, okay, how do I sound more relatable to people? Like, I am who I am, for better and for worse. And so if you're focusing so much on that and how I can relate more with the audience, like, I find it very easy. Now, again, maybe I'm just lucky. I am our audience, I engage with so much of the media in this state that I feel like I am a normal person. I just have access to a microphone every day from 2 to 6 on the radio. But I do not go into work thinking, all right, how can I say something that maybe is going to land a little bit better to the guy who's sitting in his cubicle or the guy who's sitting at his construction site? Because I think if you're having to have those conversations, you're probably in a bad spot at that point.
You, like I am, you are a University of Nebraska grad. You are a fan of the football team and others. You hope they win, but you do radio 4 hours a day. And how do you strike that balance? Because you've also broken news. You've also gotten inside stuff. You've beaten the newspaper guys to stories, and men and women to stories. How do you balance that? God, I wish this football team was better, with the fact that you have to talk about it honestly and independently every day.
Great question. I've certainly been asked something like a variation of that many times, whether it's from friends, family, or just listeners of the show. So I'll tell you a quick story. 2016 season, Nebraska. That's my third year on the air. That is year 2 of Mike Riley. And Nebraska starts off 7-0. They climb into the top 10, much to the chagrin of national people who thought they sucked, and also people around here who really hated Mike Riley. They could not stand that season. And I remember going into that Wisconsin game, and I went over, watched it with some friends, and I remember they lose. Nebraska loses in overtime, one of 8 overtime losses in a row that they have had since 2015. And just like the ache that I felt after that game. And I remember having to do the show then on Monday and talk about it. And like I'd already kind of pushed the fandom down. At least I thought I had over the last few years. But that was one of those moments where it was like, you got to be able to compartmentalize everything, because you do not want a loss to affect you to where it would then affect your job. Now, thankfully, I mean, not thankfully, but they've lost a lot of games since then. And so in a way, it's gotten a lot easier. But the thing I always tell people, I want them to do well, certainly. I want them to do well for my job. Like, first and foremost, they have not had a good season in a while. It would do wonders for us on the radio side, the podcast side, the written side. It would do wonders for all of us. I want them to do well. I do not like break down, so to speak, if they lose anymore. I have put all of that fandom into the Dallas Cowboys, which is also depressing for me. But that's the team that I want. That's the team that I live and die with. That's the team that completely can torpedo my mood. The good part is I don't have to talk about the Cowboys for 4 hours every day during the football season. I do with Nebraska. So I want them to do well. I just do not let it affect me. And maybe I'm just trying to talk myself into it. I feel like I've gotten really good at it. There are still losses occasionally where I'm like, basically every Iowa loss where it's like, are you serious? How did they lose that game? And then I don't know, you just kind of show up on Monday and you see what you can do. So it was hard. I don't think it's hard anymore. It's definitely strange. If you would have told 15, 16, 17-year-old me that I could have become this impassioned about it, I would not have believed you. But, thankfully I've been able to pull it off to some degree over the last few years.
Josh Peterson with John Bishop, 2 to 6 p.m. every day, almost every day of the year, certainly 5 days a week, 2 to 6 p.m. on 1620 The Zone in Omaha. And I'm sure you'd be happy for me to say, and you can hear that on apps online, on YouTube, and everywhere
on YouTube.
else.
Oh yeah,
right? Yeah,
the YouTube chat is we've developed our own little community inside of the YouTube chat, which is great. It's hard to develop new ways to kind of talk with media people maybe it's not, but it's felt that way for years, right? Where it's like, all right, you have your Twitter audience, you have your email audience, you have your phone audience. We introduced YouTube, like many people, we kind of fell back on it in 2020 during COVID. We went full-time on The Zone on YouTube every day in 2022. And so we're now 3.5 years of doing it every day, 12 hours a day, sometimes more if a different show is on the station. And we have a great audience on YouTube. I think a very funny audience on YouTube. And so, yes, thank you for supporting the 1620 The Zone YouTube channel. We appreciate it.
We are going to talk about the Huskers in a minute, and believe it or not, foolishly, I've waited to talk about the Huskers until I've talked about these other things. So if I wanted an audience, I should have talked about the Huskers at the very top. But you have become a 3M, an M cubed, a multimedia mogul now with your podcasting efforts. Started out a few years ago, right, as the I-80 Club. I want you to tell me a little bit about what the I-80 Club is, and then we'll talk about how you've expanded that or working on expanding that, right?
Yeah. So Jack Mitchell, who hosts a morning show and actually now a 5 to 6 p.m. show on KLIN in Lincoln, which is the Husker affiliate, 1400. Him and I have been pals for closing in on about a decade now. And we started a podcast. This is 2019, so pre-COVID. Don't really know about Zoom. And we start this podcast called Be Kind Husker Rewind, where we would watch old Nebraska games. We would do it in his basement with his crappy laptop recording the audio, and sometimes that ended up failing us, and we spent an hour and a half for nothing, right? And we talked about him, and so we released him. We did 6 episodes that summer as a way to kind of get excited for year 2 under Scott Frost. We finished with the 2018 Ohio State game, which we thought was kind of the promise of what Scott Frost could be. Well, we did that. We were like, well, we'll do it again, maybe once during the season, and we'll get back to it in the offseason. COVID happens. We never get back to it. And eventually, Jack kind of has this itch to scratch where he wants to build a community. I had an itch to scratch where I wanted to just do more pods with him because I enjoyed it. And so over the course of 2022, late spring, early summer, we start talking about what if we did something together. We had like 30 name ideas, and we ultimately settled on the I-80 Club because he lives in Lincoln, I live in Omaha, I-80 separates us. And so we started it, and we like everybody now, right? You got to make a couple extra bucks if you're going to do something like this. So this was our first foray into Patreon. And so we You have to be a paid subscriber to get everything that we do. And originally, we would record every episode on Discord, which is it's kind of like Slack, honestly, is how I would describe it. It's an app, and not all of our subscribers, but most of our subscribers have access to that, and we talk to them. And so in a way, John, it's like a new version of a message board is kind of what I would describe it, right? Like, if you are a paying subscriber to Husker 24/7 Sports, where my friends, Mike Schaefer and Michael Bruns, Brian Christopherson work, or Husker Online, Steve Sipple, Sean Callahan, Abby Barmore, Robin Wash at work, one of the things that you pay for is access to them. You get to have conversations. It's not just the work, but it's also, hey, Sean, what did you think of this movie? Hey, Shafe, what have you heard about this left tackle? Like, you get to ask those questions. That's what the I-80 Club is in some ways, but it's also become a great, vibrant community. There have been meetups with some of our subscribers that, like, Jack and I haven't even gone to, which I think is maybe the biggest testament to building something from scratch. And so we moved to YouTube a little over a year ago. Is kind of like, all right, if we're going to start growing, like, YouTube is probably what you have to do. And so we did that. We upped our level of content last year. Like, the last year has been pretty wild in terms of growth with subscribers, with the YouTube channel, and just with what we are doing on a weekly basis. It's been a whole lot of fun and very rewarding, honestly.
And you have added volleyball show with the two probably most veteran volleyball reporters in this state, right? Sheldon and Arneal.
Yeah, Jeff Sheldon, Lincoln Arneal, they joined us. Volleyball State did. Fortuitous timing does not begin to describe it. They joined us the literal day that John Cook announced that he was retiring. We were planning on doing a podcast with them that night to introduce it, about 20 minutes. We ended up going a full hour with them, obviously, because it was the news of the day. And they have been incredible. We built a brand new Volleyball State tier inside of Patreon, and they do bonus episodes. They do newsletters. They are going to do a volleyball post-game show for select Husker matches this fall, and they have been incredible. Like, John, I listened to your pod. You had Mitch Sherman on last week, and one of the things that you talk about with them, and we kind of have done it too, is like, how in the world do you talk about the thing that everybody talks about all the time? And that's Nebraska football, right? But they are talking about something that not everybody is talking about all the time, and certainly people are not talking about with the level of skill, knowledge, and context in the industry. And that's, we essentially were making a bet on that. We are going to go after someone who is doing a product that people are very interested in and also isn't really being served. Since they've joined us, they have had Danny Busboom Kelly on. They have had John Cook on the podcast. They have had Husker assistant coaches. They have had former Husker players. They've had national people who have written articles about the state of professional volleyball. They have had national people just to talk about the sport in general. They cover that sport better than most people cover their sports, and they are a part of the I-80 Club now. And so, we keep just getting so excited because as we get ready for the start of the season, next month with the AVCA tournament in Lincoln, like, that thing is going to pop, and we think that we're going to be able to cover it better than anybody else because we have those two guys with us.
If there's anything we've learned over the however long podcasting has been, I guess since the iPod was invented a couple of decades, is that niche is where it's at. Joe Rogan, his niche is Joe Rogan, right?
Sure.
Barstool Sports, their niche is scratching in places and talking like guys, right? Whatever your niche is, big or small, you're not going to be successful if you're splattering. And I think it sounds like you're not. Is that volleyball is a niche here, and people love it. Husker football is not a niche, but it's to a particular community of people who are interested in that. If you were doing a big, wide, general podcast on college football, you would have to be the Cole Auerbach. You'd have to be the Stu Mandel. You'd have to be those people, right?
Yes.
So stay in your lane, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, right? To survive in this podcasting business.
Yeah, for sure. And, the obvious follow-up is like, okay, so how do you do the 4 hours and then find something different in a different angle to do, because Jack and I, we go live on Wednesday nights. During the summer, we've moved it to 7 o'clock. That is a subscriber-only show. You want it? You have to be a subscriber. We send out a link every Wednesday morning or Tuesday night. Here's what we have. For example, on our one of our more recent episodes, we had Michael Severe join us for the first time. We had Sam McEwen join us for the first time. Those were wonderful conversations. Other times it's just him and I. And then we do a Saturday show, which that used to be paywalled, and we flipped it because that has become kind of our bread and butter show. And certainly in the football season, the way we kind of describe it, John, is like, hey, we're on at 9:30. You want a good pregame show? Like, we're going to give you that. We're going to talk about the things you are interested in. So our niche, I think, is we're talking about the thing everybody else is, but we're talking about it in only the way that we can. You asked the question about my fandom earlier. Jack is the complete opposite. We introduced a basketball postgame show this last season called After Nebraska Ball. They were on after almost every Big Ten game. And John, there were times where Jack did not want to be there. And not only did he not want to be there, he would start the podcast and say, I don't want to be doing this. And, a professional, like a radio professional, might look at that and say, what is he doing? Like, that is terrible radio or podcasting. I look at it and say, he's the voice of the fan. That's how they're feeling right now. And so he is able to match the emotions of the state and of the fandom in a way that I can't. And so that is why I am able to do 20 hours of radio a week and then another 2 to 3 hours of podcasting a week, because it's a different person that I'm talking to, even though him and John are quite similar. They actually used to do a show together, but he's different because of that fandom component. And so that makes it like I go into the shows just like I go into a radio show with an energy that is different. I know it's going to be different. It's a little bit more loosey-goosey. It's a little less structured, but I think that we have really found something enjoyable that we have together, and it's made for a really fun last few years. And we say this every football season. We think this is going to be our biggest football season yet, and we're hoping so.
Everybody is hoping so. How do your bosses at 1620 The Zone feel about and support this sort of private enterprise?
They are good with it. I think they support it by not having any issues with it, which is the thing that I wanted the most. I remember talking about it. I've talked about it with my current boss. I've talked about it with former bosses, and it's like, hey, look, it's supplemental income, right? So it's like important in that regard. It's fun, but it doesn't get in the way of my job, which like anything that I am going to do, all of us in media, if we're not a national person, and hell, even them, that we have side gigs, right? Some people do play-by-play. I do play-by-play occasionally. Some people travel around. I'm going to be traveling this fall to do some spotting work for the Big Ten Network. As long as it doesn't get in front of the job, they're okay with it. And so I have been very blessed. I've said that word a lot today. I've been very blessed to have a supportive infrastructure at work that has allowed me to do this and some of the other things over the last handful of years.
If I learned anything 30 years ago, it's that the best people to work for are the ones who appreciate your ambition and your talents and what the side gig brings to the regular gig and vice versa. These are not competitors for your time. They are complements to your presentation, complementary elements of your presentation. And I really believe that. And some don't. And I think that's to their detriment, to be honest with you.
100%. One of my favorite people in media covers the Dallas Cowboys down in Dallas. He has a radio show. His name is Bob Sturm. He's on The Ticket, which is a legacy radio station in the country. They have won Marconi Award multiple times. So he has that show, and he's on from 3 to 7 every day. He used to write for The Athletic. He now has a Substack, and I am a subscriber of it. I'm a paid subscriber because I love the Dallas Cowboys, and I don't think there are many people that cover the Cowboys better than he does. And there was a mailbag that he did a couple years ago, and I decided to ask a question because since I'm in the industry, I'm curious how on earth he manages his day because it seems quite interesting, especially in the fall. And he answered me, which was awesome. And he writes, during football season on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays about last night's game on Mondays, and then on Tuesdays he looks at the offense. He does film breakdowns. He's very knowledgeable. Wednesdays, he does defensive breakdowns. I use that as a way not to talk about the Dallas Cowboys again, but to say that is the things that he's writing about he is going to use on the radio. That is a part of his prep. And I imagine since he's in Dallas, the producer role is going to be way different than ours. Like my producer, Nick Grimm, he doesn't give me, like a rundown like that. John and I come up with what we're going to talk about. So I imagine Bob has a little bit of that. But otherwise, like writing about the Cowboys on a Monday morning, it's probably getting his brain going for the afternoon. And so I've started writing a little bit for Husker Max this year, and I would never view that as a competitor. I would view that as me forming new ideas that we can then use on the radio. And it's the same thing with the podcast, like, do I think sometimes, oh, that would be a better discussion for the radio show than the podcast, or vice versa? Of course. But that's because I know my co-host. I'm not going to go to Jack and say, hey, I think we should talk about Creighton tonight. Like, why would he want to talk about Creighton? Just like I'm not going to go to John and say, hey, let's do an hour on Nebraska basketball, because he'd say, why would we talk an hour about Nebraska basketball? So it's not only knowing your audience, which I've talked about on the pod today, but it's about knowing your co-hosts. And I think that that's super important too.
One of the things that Steve Sipple, who was with the Lincoln Journal-Star for many years and now at Husker Online on 3, has told me a number of times, is that the radio show has made him a better writer and a better reporter. And the same thing you just said, it gives you ideas. It sort of helps you. When you're on the radio, it kind of helps you parse things out, right? It helps you filter out some of the things that are important. And you finally get to the nut of it. And then that allows you to get to the nut of it quicker as a writer. Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely does. I think when I sit down to write now, I feel like I have to be much more like formed in my thoughts, because you just don't want it to. I mean, gosh, do a transcript of yourself talking sometime. There's a lot of pauses. You're saying the same word a couple of times, and I've been doing this for 10 plus years, and I'll do a transcript of myself, and I'm like, yikes, Josh, what were you trying to say there? And so you have to be a little bit more fully formed in writing, but it does. Like, so I had a project that I'd been working on for the last 3-4 weeks, where I wanted to compare year 3 of Matt Rule at Temple and at Baylor to what could be at year 3 for Nebraska. And so I went and looked at all sorts of returning production numbers. And then I had a chance to talk to 2 reporters who covered him when he was at those stops. John DiCarlo, who covered him at Temple, and then Sam Kahn Jr., who covered him when he was at Baylor. And it was wonderful because it gave me all sorts of information that I previously did not have. And so even though that was for the podcast and for Husker Max, we then brought some of that information to the zone. It gave us multiple segments worth of discussion, and I feel much more informed yet again as someone who is covering the team for 2025. And so that's my goal with all this stuff. It's put out something that people enjoy listening to and are interested in, but also do some homework. And so I'm trying to do a little column A, little column B kind of all the time when I'm doing these various projects.
All right, I promise the listeners that we are going to ask about Husker football in a minute here, but one of the things that's intrigued me is this project you have been working on, and I heard you describe it with somebody when you were chatting, and so I'm going to put this up on the screen, kicked in the groin, like Nebraska football for the last 20 years or whatever it is. I don't know if that's exactly what you call it, but what is that all about? You've spent a lot of time looking at some of those heartbreaking moments of Nebraska football. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yes, it is. So Jack Mitchell, him and I were doing a post-game show last November after the USC loss. So this is the first loss with Dana Holgerson calling plays, and it was the 4th straight loss. They dropped to 5-5. A lot of depression in the state. And Jack has long referred to this era of Husker football as the groin kick era of Nebraska, where there's all these hallmarks. Sometimes it involves bad calls. Sometimes it involves a terrible turnover, bad special teams, whatever it is. And he told me that night, he said, this game had all the hallmarks of the groin kick era. This is the perfect encapsulation of it. And I jokingly said, I wonder if you could rank these games mathematically, what it would look like. And so that was the kernel, right? That was the kernel of an idea. And so I thought about it a little bit more that night because I was like, that could be really interesting. And in January, I decided to write a prologue. Okay, what if I was explaining this, what would it actually look like? And so when would the era start? How would you go about ranking games? And I kind of put it on the shelf because it seemed so incredibly daunting, because we decided that the era began after Nebraska's last overtime win and the last game where they got a first down in overtime in 2014 versus Iowa, because it just felt so scary. My wife and I were moving, and I was training for the Boston Marathon, and so we had a lot going on. And so finally, once we moved, we got to this house in March, and I said, all right, I need to get back into this because I think it could be something special. So anyway, long story short, wrote wrote up 70 games worth of capsules, highlights, all sorts of stuff. The biggest thing that was going to be a part of this project, I didn't want to edit it. I didn't want to record it. I needed help. And so we have an incredible producer in Omaha named Ian Alio, and he scored the Unsportsmanlike Conduct theme song, if you've ever heard that before. He's the guy who did that. He is a record producer. He does bands. He does all sorts of stuff in Omaha and nationally. I am thankful enough to be pretty close at the end, and so I reached out to him. We met for lunch, and I told him about the project, told him about what I was looking for, and so spent, I don't know, I probably recorded with him over the last couple of months, John, maybe a total of 16 to 18 hours. The first time that I did it, I went in on the Friday of Memorial Weekend because we got that day off, and I got there at 10 a.m., and I didn't leave until 5. Jack and I have done 2 recording sessions. We have 1 more. And so the log line is we are ranking mathematically Nebraska's last 70 losses from, as we described it, the most palatable all the way to the biggest kick in the groin. And we are getting really, really close to the top 10, which we are actually breaking up into 2 episodes. And it has been the biggest project that I've ever done, and I would say the most rewarding project that I've ever done. It's been quite the ride over the last few months putting this all together. And now that it's like we're nearing the end, it's like a little sad, but it's also really exciting because I know how much time and effort we've all put into it.
How many episodes, and where do we find it?
So it's available on all the podcast services. The way that the episodes are broken down is the first half is the scripted component with me, with highlights, and that's the stuff that Ian did. He scored it. He edited together all the highlights, et cetera, et cetera. And then the back half, we went to the Omaha Conservatory of Music, and we recorded a conversation on audio and video. Mike Stibbs, my former Unsportsmanlike Conduct producer, he helped out there as well. And so we are now, as of this recording, episode 5 just dropped, and that was games ranked 30 to 21. And now we are past every blowout. There are no more 2-score or more losses. Every game moving forward will be a 1-score defeat for the team. There's only been 1 overtime game showed up so far, and so there will be 3 episodes left as of this recording, 20 to 11, 10 to 6, and then 5 to 1. And so it's available on all the usual podcast apps. It's available on YouTube, and just a little bit of a tease, we're gonna do some stuff early next year with this that I think people are really going to dig, that is like kind of on top of what we have already done so far, that I think is going to be really special.
So take a listen. I'm going to. So 2025 Nebraska football. Who's going to be kicking whose groin here? Is it a groin kick season, or is it a kick them in the groin season? Year number 3 for Matt Rule. How about that for a segue, huh? That was a professional segue for you.
I have now reached the point that I kind of hate being this guy, but John, I need to see it before I believe it. I am firmly in the 7-5 camp. I've been saying 6-6 or 7-5 since this season ended last year. I think that I've done a really good job since the disaster that was the 2019 season of like pumping the brakes. Last year, I said 7-5, so I missed it by 1 game. I was really disappointed because I could have nailed it. But I'm in 7-5 camp. I need to see it. There are a lot of things that I like. Dana Holgerson, I think, is a great play caller, great play designer, and maybe less of a great play designer. He has a great feel for the game. That's certainly what the research and conversations that I've had with people shows. So, like, I really like that. I think Mike Eckler, special teams, very great move there. It's just, will that show itself now, or is that more of a 2026, 2027 move, right? Dylan Raiola, year 2, very, very interesting. I like the pieces. Wide receiver, and I am one of the folks that is actually bullish on the offensive line, right? My questions come with the depth at running back. I really like Emmett Johnson, but what in the world do they have behind him? And then the defensive side of the ball. I talk to people in the know, and there does seem to be not even a cautious optimism, but an optimism that the defensive line is going to be fine, even though it's new guys, because it is going to be more athletic, even though they're young, right? And so it's always a push and pull. But I'm concerned about that, and it's John Butler. I did some research earlier this offseason about his 1 year at Penn State as a defensive coordinator, and that was a little over a decade ago. And John, it's pretty interesting if you're a lover of the Bill Connolly SP Plus numbers like I am. You look at the SP Plus defensive number for that season, and it is the worst of the last 15 years for Penn State, if I remember right. It's the one time that it dropped off just a little bit. And it was in the mid-30s. It wasn't terrible, but it was still not as good as they have been otherwise. I think Tony White is a huge loss. I think that he was a really good coordinator, and so I think that's a question. And just to go back to the Groin Kick Chronicles, can they get out of their own way? I mean, the through line of these games, turnovers, special teams miscues, just not knowing how to win. I had a conversation with Kevin Kugler for a bonus podcast that will come out in a couple of weeks, and I asked him that about the through line, and he said something that I just hadn't thought about before, and it's just the players kind of have passed this down, sadly, to every group of players. You talk to a Husker in the 80s or 90s, and what are they going to say? Well, this guy taught me, and then I taught the next group of guys. Well, these players, sadly, have only learned heartbreak, horrible losses, unable to get it done in one-score situations. The defense not getting off the field on a third down. The offense, their track record when they are tied or down late in the game is atrocious in this stretch of football. So can they do that? And then if they can, will that actually mean something for them? I will say this, for the Matt Rule year twos, those seasons finished with hard-fought, tough one-score victories, and they were then able to parlay it into 2015 for Temple and 2019 for Baylor, where, kind of like Nebraska, John, horrible in one-score games in year one, a little bit better in year two, and then they broke through in year three. And so ultimately, if you were to say, Josh, you can ask for any stat as it pertains to 2025 right now, and I will tell you what it is. I would say, what's their record or what's their winning percentage in one-score games? Because I think that will ultimately tell the story of the 2025 season.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I have believed in the wait till I see it mantra for so long that people don't want to hear it any longer. But it's true. People ask me, what about the Huskers this year? I'm drinking the Kool-Aid again. As well, I'll tell you in September. Okay, I'll give you an idea in September. But I think we've talked about this before. The numbers, the hallmark, the demarcations, don't know exactly what word I'm looking for good coaching and great coaching. All right. You have to win close games. You have to win on the road. And you have to have a combination of not those god awful losses, which are just as bad or worse than not pulling out a victory over somebody you shouldn't beat. I know that seems sort of cumbersome, but to be a really great team, you have to sometimes beat teams that are better than you are. And to prove that, and all of those things are coaching. And I've said this, this is a year that, I don't know if it's fair, but Rule can't have a 6 or 7 win season. This has got to be an 8 or 9 win season. It has to keep moving up. There's just too much on the line here. The revenue sharing, all the money that they're rounding up, the stadium innovations down the road, all of those things. They cannot be a mediocre football team any longer if they want to be what they aspire to be, what this entire state aspires to be, which is, what it was 25 years ago or more, right? Almost 30 years ago now. So those are the things. Matt Rule's done everything wonderfully. Media is good. He works the state. He does all of that stuff beautifully. Now he's got to win football games, period.
Yeah.
Which is what he's hired to do.
100%. The thing that I keep saying about this season, John, is it is the year where you just want to see the proof of concept. Like, it is now time to see that. And I'm not asking for 11 or 12. I'm not even asking for 10. I would settle for 8 with some other factors maybe that go into it. I think 8-4 or 9-3. 9-3 certainly. I don't think that you can leave a season with 9-3 and not feel good about the program. I mean, I guess Mike Riley's team kind of did that in 2016, right, with a lot of blowouts. But this group now, so far removed from any real success, that I think 8-4 or 9-3, and I think you go into 2026 and you say, okay, like, that's when it gets really interesting, because suddenly you would, in theory, have a quarterback who's played really well, a team who's played really well. No longer do you have to have questions about bowl games and more than 500 records. Like, if there is one thing, in my opinion, that I do wonder if I am underestimating with this team, it is mindset, and how for the first time now in almost a decade, they will not get asked about the bowl streak. They do not have to ask or answer that question anymore. Hey, can you make a bowl game? They did it. and they did it in the weirdest way possible. They were 5-1, and then suddenly they were 5-5. But they got that 6th win versus Wisconsin, and then they even tacked on a bowl win afterwards. So at least they don't have to answer that question. It's just, how much does that matter? Am I thinking too much about the psyche? Or is that going to be something that we see them and they're like, yeah, we're a whole lot looser this year because we don't have that pressure. We'll find out in a handful of weeks.
How does this play into the dynamic? It used to be you got an 18-year-old kid and you taught him how to play football, and then you worked into the starting lineup as a sophomore or junior, and then you progressed and maybe you got a fifth. All of those rules are out the window. Mixing and matching, 30, 40 new people come into a program, people leave. The roster limits are going to be in effect soon. So does 5 year ago history mean anything any longer? Does that play into this at all? This is a new bunch every single year. It's a new group every single year, and not just a handful of recruits, but 30, 40 people new every year.
Yeah, that was the question that I set out to answer with my most recent project, and that was like, what is portable from what he did at Temple, he being Rule, at Temple and Baylor? Because I looked at the returning production of those groups, and you're talking about homegrown returning production, and it was infinitely better than what it's looking like for Nebraska this year. And so for a guy who builds around culture and a guy who builds around like stick around, you'll ultimately make your way onto the field and we'll develop you. Like, this is different. And we knew that, right? When he got hired in 2022, I had been looking to this season since he got hired because I was like, this is when it should show itself, but can it show itself? And I don't know. I think he has adapted well. If I'm looking for one of those huge pieces of optimism, I would say for the first time that I can remember, maybe ever, certainly since, the Solich era, he saw a deficiency and he said, we have to fix it. Now, some would say, Josh, it was obvious that they had to move on from Satterfield. It was obvious that they had to move on from Foley. It was, but you know what? It's been obvious that coaches have had to move on from other coaches in the past. And guess what they didn't do? They didn't move on from them because they were so freaking stubborn. And so I think that is, I am not underestimating that. I am saying, wow, he not only did he move on from his OC, he did it in November. Not only did he move on from Ed Foley, he hired a guy. I know he has Husker ties, but look at the production that Tennessee special teams has had over the last few years. It is spectacular. So I like the moves that he made. Now let's see if they can actually do those things on the field, given, as you said, college football infinitely different than it was even a handful of years ago.
Yeah, and again, we'll know. I don't think we'll know everything in that game in Kansas City, and I don't think we'll know everything after the first 3 games because there's at least 2, if not 3, winnable games there. And if they don't, then maybe that's what we'll know. If they don't win all 3 of those games, maybe that will be a harbinger of what we're going to see. But I'll tell you what, I don't need to beat this horse. Sorry, bad metaphor. I don't need to say this again. I lived out of this state for a long, long time. It just baffles me continually as a native, as a graduate of this school who now works here, that the people in this state have been this patient. There isn't a place in the country, including Alabama after Bear Bryant, when they sucked for a while, the fans said, no, thank you. How in the world these people stick with this has just been an amazing sociological case study. I don't know.
It's incredible. I always wonder about the next generation because I will be 37 in early September. And so I am one of those last, the last kind of generation that remembers the Natty, right? And then a couple years younger, those are the people that remember the last conference championship. But John, you go a decade or so younger than me, and you're talking about people that don't remember either of those. And they barely remember the winning 9 or 10 games. And so I am always curious, as someone who is still young, right? I'm not even 40. I'm going to be in this business in some way, shape, or form, however it turns, for many more decades. How can they stick around, or how will they stick around, or will they stick around if the program, continues to struggle? I don't want to put everything on this season, but there is definitely going to be a breaking point at some point in time. I don't know when. But I cannot imagine that people will still want to fill up a 70 whatever thousand seat stadium if the team is, middling for quite some time. So I'm always wondering about it because I have to think about those people because those are my customers every single day. And so, that's why, not to toot our own horn, but I feel like John and I do a good job at speaking truth to power. I think Jack and I do a good job of that as well. Like, we're not BSing you. We're not going to drink and chug the Kool-Aid just for the sake of chugging the Kool-Aid. And so at the very least, I hope that people want to stick around with us because they know that they're not going to get any BS when they tune into the Grum or the I-80 Club on an afternoon or on a Wednesday or Saturday morning.
All right, so 2 to 6 p.m. weekdays at 1620 The Zone. We'll still call that your day job, right? And every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And then give me an idea. Again, I think I got the name of the pod series a little off. What's the name of it?
The Groin Kick Chronicles. And so that is available if you subscribe just to the I-80 Club feed, wherever you get your pods. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. We have a YouTube channel. We hit 1,000 subscribers a couple months ago, which was really exciting. So that's where we're doing all that stuff. In football season, we don't know the exact schedule right now, but we will be doing a Wednesday night show. We will be doing a pregame show. We will be doing a postgame show on Saturday nights when it works with my work schedule. There will be volleyball state stuff, and I have introduced a brand new football show that will be dropping on Thursday mornings, and I actually already have like 4 or 5 guests booked for that, including a tease. I'm not going to say who it is, but a national college football play-by-play announcer is going to join me, I believe, ahead of the week 1 game. So looking forward to that. I got a Cowboys guy that, they always talk, John, in acting like a one for you, one for me, one for them, one for us. I want to call a Cowboys guy, so I'm going to talk to one of my favorite personalities down there. He's going to join me ahead of the Week 1 game against the defending champ Philadelphia Eagles, and then all sorts of stuff. So my hope is that'll be every Thursday, and it'll go up really early. It's going to be recorded sometime earlier in the week. So busy, but yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
If you're not sure, just Google Josh Peterson, I-80 Club, or both, and you'll get whatever you need. So, hey, thanks a million. As always, I enjoy it. I asked you for half an hour, and I went a lot longer. I'm going to blame that on you, and I appreciate you bringing bright and early in the morning the kind of energy that you offer later in the day. So thanks, Josh.
John, I always appreciate the invite. Thanks for having me.
Josh Peterson, 1620 The Zone, and all that other stuff. And Google it if you have to. He's been with us this time around on Watch the Media. Thanks so much for being with us. This episode of Watch the Media, available here on YouTube. You can also hear it on Apple, Spotify, and other areas in the podcast world. We so much appreciate you being with us as we examine the sports media world.